Well, thank you, Katie, and Scottish Geology Festival. Thank you for having me, because I don't really have any experience with geology. This is very much just general curiosity. So yeah, really excited to share what I've been doing. I will just share my screen. Go. Cool. So yeah, so my name is Christina Riley. I'm an artist based in Ayrshire on the west coast of Scotland. Only recently, as I said, been fascinated with pebbles, at least to the stage that I am now. So yeah, really grateful that I'm allowed to talk about them. So for me, it began kind of as it has for most people, I think. I grew up on the coast, so I've always, enjoyed beach combing, and anytime I go to the beach, I'll no matter where I am, you kind of pick stones and pebbles, and that's what I'll take home as a souvenir or a memento or something. So last year, this kind of turned into a daily photo series during lockdown, called The Beach Today, which has just been turned into a book published by Guillemot Press. So I'll be sharing some images from that book. And then as well as that, some images from the next series that came after that, when lockdown kind of continued. So I'm just going to read the introduction to the book. That kind of gives a background on how this project came about and why. And then, yeah, I'll show some images of the beach today, which features stones now and again, as well as pebbles, shells, pebbles, feathers, kind of anything found on the beach. And then after that, some pairings from the second project, which is very much pebble based. So I'll just read the introduction. This is the book by Guillemot Press, who just did a very beautiful job with it. I just can't believe it exists. So this is the background to The Beach Today. Anyone who's seen the setting sun tuck itself into Scotland's west coast will know the colours of land, sky and sea can shift in seconds, and that no still nor moving image will ever do it justice. Nothing else can rouse the whirling wonder and grounding awe of standing at the shoreline, looking out across an expanse of seemingly endless blue with so many mysteries held above and beneath its surface.
I want an online artist talk.
Standing there, I feel a push and pull from within, as if the water I'm made of is being held to by the moon. The beach today is an attempt to share the shifting shoreline, if only in fragments, holding the beach on a single page in a series of visual diary entries from March 20th to July 3rd, 2020. As homes across the world closed their doors, many people found themselves suddenly without access to green grass or clean air, let alone the edge of the sea. So as the crisis heightened, so did my appreciation of what was on my doorstep. Almost 7 miles of uninterrupted shoreline running from Troon to Irvine. Looking out across the water made a newly shrunken world feel a little bit bigger. I don't remember worrying much about lockdown itself in the beginning. It was almost too unbelievable to fear, being acutely aware of the effects long periods of time indoors have on my physical and mental health. I instead jumped ahead to a more recognizable future that I could see unfolding. That previous December, I'd felt a familiar quickening of my breath and an equally familiar dull ache inside my head. Not a pain as such, but more like two unyielding palms were cupped around my brain, as if trying to squeeze the air out of a punctured tire. Soon after, and for the first time in years, my anxieties manifested into debilitating hypochondria, tying time and my stomach up in knots for one endless month, where I wholeheartedly and silently assumed was my last. The prospect of falling into this state again, during a global health crisis no less, was something that I refused. I wouldn't allow it to happen because I simply didn't know how I would cope if it did. And while I fully understood that this indignant determination wouldn't in itself act as any real kind of preventative measure, what I could control were certain small things that I knew kept my head above water, with the added benefit of knowing that the approaching waters were deep. I promised myself I would utilize my half hour of exercise and that I would not take my surroundings for granted. I would breathe the fresh sea air. Every day I would walk on the beach. At first glance, a stroll along the seashore presents a simple stretch of sand and water side by side. It's an image so familiar to us living on an island that I wonder how many gaps in our perception are filled subconsciously. Viewing the seascape, our eyes can relapse, filling in the gaps that we know so well. But look down, look carefully. Slowly, vision sharpens and the sand is drawn into focus. Ask what that is, glinting up ahead in the sun, and the shore will answer by unraveling in its light. Soon the beach is sprinkled with periwinkles, sea glass, and barnacled limpets, whelks and cowries, pebbles encrusted with coralline algae, and bivalves long and latched from their other halves. There are mussels, a deep and iridescent indigo, and oysters so ancient, their aged layers stack like pages in a book in a language that isn't ours to read. Everything was new and unfathomably old, lifetime upon lifetime, washing up in tiny, briny fragments of shell and pebble. It wasn't long before my pockets were heavy and clinking with treasure, and on laying out these daily finds at home, I was astonished by how different the same small beach could look from one day to the next. When the project began in late March, the beach shone with a golden yellow glow, as if marking the changing of the seasons. And then when a low sun slices across the sand, all I could see was sea glass, as it flashed and flickered like little lighthouses. Another day could offer no glass at all, but clusters of earthy black and brown pebbles, freckled flint polished smooth, or cracked in half to expose glossy toffee centers. Certain artifacts catch the eye instinctively, inharmonious and inorganic among the shingle. They're bright white, but not quite shell-shaped, pottery fragments. I flip them over with my breath held, awaiting the reveal of what colors are painted on the other side. And then there's the excitement of finding rare curiosities: sea urchins, mermaids' purses, fossil and bone, 2 clay inkwells, filled to the brim with salt water, as if the sea was writing its story. Forming collections of these objects became a quiet ritual after each beach walk. Acting as diary entries for hazy and uncertain days, I found comfort in fitting stone, shell, and feather together like puzzle pieces. Careful arrangements and tedious fixation kindled a new excitement and wonder for a familiar place. The same place, every day, even, or especially so, on the days when the west coast winds and rain caused tears to stream down my cheeks, leaving me unsure if the salt on my lips was from me or the sea. As the months progressed, the beach ceased being singular. It changed a little bit each day, never finished and yet always whole. Constantly moving, the shore is an ever-shifting in-between place, finding new edges with each lick of salt water and offering tiny pieces of itself from its depths. I began to think that just like the beach, gathering, rearranging, releasing, we're all made of fragments. So much emerged during these months as winter thawed and spring became summer. The year opened my eyes to the beauty and the idiosyncrasies of the seasons, to human and non-human needs, to fear, injustice, and mortality. Parts of life that have always been present, only now in this contraction of our lives, they can be seen with a sharper clarity. Can the act of looking closely broaden our view as well as sharpen it? The beach today is one small act of stopping to look, to pull what surrounds us into focus so that we can see it clearly, all hard-edged and sparkling and raw. So that is kind of the only writing in this book, and then the rest is just the images of each collection. So that was it. I was off on my daily walks, and it wasn't an entirely new idea. I had been doing this before, So whenever I go to a new beach, I would kind of notice how it looked different from somewhere else. I went to Cannon Beach a few years ago, and everything there was white. The feathers were white, the fossils of some kind and shells, they were all white. And even like on the left, there's a shard of plastic, and even all the plastic was white. And then on the Isle of Harris, when I went, the plastic was like a bright teal blue to match the sea. The shells were kind of tropical or like kind of almost candy colored, like pink and orange. So this project in a way contradicts what I thought I knew about that, because it was the same beach, but it looked different every single day. And I think what I found was that to be proven wrong, or to be shown something better, it's better and even more interesting than you originally thought. Like that's the best thing about doing anything, really. So by going to the same beach every day, I realized that one beach can actually look completely different from one tide to the next, let alone one day to the next. So in saying that, though, there probably is, and I think I did notice eventually that there are some similarities. So there's some that I see, and then I'm interested, especially if anyone here has, you know, more of a background in geology, if there are certain themes that kind of look out of place or as you would expect for the location, anything that crops up more so than others that I maybe wouldn't really notice. So personally, I started to develop favorite types of shells, shells and pebbles and all kinds. So I really love the kind of bright yellow and soft peach periwinkles, the flat periwinkles, and absolutely anything with barnacles on it or other forms of incrustations and kind of life growing on life, which I found here. Like I couldn't believe when I first saw the greens and the purples of the rock pools. Like it didn't seem like the colors that you would expect to find on the beach, but then they've been on the beach for who knows how long. So they're very much beach colors. And then here, I just learned that the lovely kind of calcareous growth in the center is a form of coralline algae, Merle, which I, on looking it up, discovered it means like a body, its name means a body made of rock, and it's a northern version. So it's, I'm going to say this wrong probably, but Lithothamnion glacial, which, and just finding out these little things, every single collection would kind of bring something new. So as well as the favorite shells and things growing on shells, I also developed favorite pebbles. So there's a particular patch on the beach where it's maybe only about 3 or 4 square meters, or it's small and quite bad with measurements, but it's in that area, all the pebbles are a lot smoother, and they're really, really polished. So that kind of got me asking, you know, is there something to do with the size or the texture or something that makes them kind of congregate together and be carried by the tides all in one group? So it got to the point where, you know, I'd be crouching and I would just constantly see one that's more colorful or more smooth or glossier than the next. So I would just eventually just kind of drop to my knees and sit down and reach whatever was at arm's length. I would just keep grabbing them. Just there's probably a couple in there, but yeah, they're so polished, and I don't know. I know that it's a different amount of time depending on the type of rock, but even then I have no grasp of how long it might take to get a pebble that polished. I mean, like they shine out like sea glass on the sand. So those are probably, at least that's the pebbles that really got me interested beyond the shells and what I thought were more beach related objects and into the rocks as well. So this one was from one of the very first days. I wasn't really thinking about what I was collecting at this point. So I was just kind of picking up things that were interesting, not really arranging it in any way in particular. So just enough to share it. I was just posting the pictures on Twitter, sharing, because it was lockdown and that's kind of how my time was spent. So yeah, just anything that was interested in shape and texture, which looking back now for a first day, I feel like on any day I would be very impressed with these kind of things coming up. So I still am not entirely sure. This is one that I'll probably ask Katie about, because I'm not entirely sure what these are, but so I still have one of these ones, which has these little star shapes. And then you can see if you can see them, the movements underneath. So would love to know what those are, if anyone does. So I'm just going to go through a few more of the daily collections. And then I will maybe, if anyone sees anything that I don't really know what any of these are. So yeah, I would be so interested to know if anything stands out as interesting or not interesting. So this was probably one of the ones where I just realized I couldn't believe the colors that I was finding. In the bottom left corner, the orange underneath, I'm starting to learn what forms the holes in the stones, but the colors there, like, it was beyond what I had seen before. I wasn't used to seeing something so vibrant on the beach. It was all usually quite muted, and what I thought was all grays and beige, and then now I know that that's not the color of the beach at all. Like here, once I saw these deep reds and purples, I couldn't believe I hadn't seen that color before. And this was May, yeah, so I'd been collecting for quite a while, and I think this was one of the first times that these colors really came up. And again, with the rocks, the kind of lines on some of them, and the pink, I don't even know the words to call them, but that kind of thing, I just hadn't seen that detail in rocks before. And once I started looking really, really closely, just couldn't believe the colors and the shapes and the patterns that were coming up and how they related to everything else as well. So it was quite shocking the number of times that you would find a purple stone or something and then find a purple piece of pottery as well to match. This one, again, mostly pottery, I guess, really brings the color here. But then that's, again, those kind of pink and orange, it looks quartzy. That's about as much as my knowledge goes, because it's that kind of sugary pink embedded into this rock, which just matched everything else. And then somebody on Twitter let me know that it's like a Dundee marmalades jar, and I found a couple of those over the spring summer, not full jars, but just the fragments. That was on the summer solstice. Couldn't find, I generally don't like to have shadows and stuff, because it kind of messes with the colors. You don't get the true colors of something, but I couldn't find a shaded place on this day. It was, as it I guess should be on the summer solstice, it was very brightly sunny, and in the shade it was just way too dark. So we've got the shadows here, which I do like on that piece of sea glass. More. Again, just each day, I think even if I had a color kind of palette in mind, it would always just choose something else once you start to see something. These are some interesting, or to me, interesting pebbles, but again, I have no idea what they are. So if anything out there. And again, yeah, they kind of match the color. The pottery was brown that day. And I just got to the point where I wasn't really sure if that was really happening, or if once your eyes are attuned to a certain color, that's just all you see and you kind of go a bit tunnel visioned. yeah, I'm not sure. Because again, yeah, day to day, it can be bright orange and brown, and then it's these really soft pastels. That's another one where I'm really interested to know what the stone would be, if it's maybe like some kind of concrete, but the pink and the orange globules almost. I've not seen that before, and not since on the beach. So I'm quite interested in that one. And then that's the book. So that holds every one of the images. So I think there's around 100. It was from March until the very start of July, when we thought we were coming out of lockdown. So I just thought I was still going to the beach most days, but I didn't have that half-hour required walk every day, which feels kind of weird to look back on. So this was published by Guillemot Press, who have just turned this kind of daily project that was on my phone, photographed on printer paper, because that's all I had. All of my photography equipment was in Glasgow, where I was living at the time, and I had gone to visit family on the coast and just stayed there. So I had none of my usual stuff with me. So I just thought I would include this, because of course, of everything I've done with the Pebbles, I think what got the most attention was this kind of silly tweet about Chris Packham's wardrobe one day, because it just, one of them, I think the first one that I posted, I thought, oh, that looks familiar. So then I thought I would just try and do it with as many pairings as possible. So it felt silly at the time, and then I've realized that it was kind of a precursor to what the next project was. I kind of thought of it as like the EP between albums, where you're kind of like testing out a new format and playing with like matching colors and things that look good together and seeing if it works, rather than, I'll try and think of it as that rather than just a very silly tweet. And I do look at it now and again, I find it quite soothing to look through. So when I moved just a mile down the coast, I moved from the sandy beach to this kind of pebble shingle beach. If there's a difference between a pebble beach and a shingle beach, but yeah, I don't know that. So this is, yeah, so it's apparently formed in 1840 by the Duke of Portland, who I'll talk a tiny bit more about later on. And it's just completely different to the one that I was on before. So just the first beach was a very long sandy stretch, had anything you would really expect to find on a beach. It was shells, rock pools, feathers, pottery, kind of, and pebbles as well, like a bit of everything. And this is all just this was taken at high tide, so particularly small today, but even at low tide, a small pebble beach. So it's an artificial bank made from ballast. And the information that I've been able to find about it says that the ballast comes mostly from Ireland, but then it also says just like, and elsewhere in the world. So like from anywhere, really, who knows? So when I first visited, like even with my limited knowledge of geology, I kind of looked down and thought, there's so many different pebbles here, there are so many different colors and patterns and look different to each other, that surely like this doesn't happen naturally. Like it felt, I didn't really think, or I didn't really know about man-made banks or anything, but just thought, oh, this is unusual. So I just kind of, yeah, that really interested me when I first visited. I just thought, oh, I'm not used to seeing this many stones in one place that look like this. So this is just like an example of the kind of stuff that you see when you look down there. So when I first started visiting in October, it's just, I mean, I suppose if anyone kind of lives on the West Coast, you'll know as well, or pretty much anywhere really, sometimes you just get the best sunsets. So I was just taking a picture of the sunset every day. And I just thought, oh, you're just taking the same picture over and over again. And that I didn't think that would be a new project, just to take a picture of the sunset every day, but it kind of made me think I'd be interested. Like, I kind of miss having a daily project. So at the same time, I was taking pictures of the sky, but then I was also really fascinated with these stones and the variety of them. I'm not sure if anyone on here follows a poet called Dean Wilson. So he posts a Pebble of the day, and I was following him and just really interested in what he was picking up, because by that time I was beachcombing all the time. And I just instantly felt, I was like, oh, I too like just really want to like post all these interesting pebbles. But it got to the point where I couldn't really just pick a favorite. So, or I couldn't at least pick a number of favorites that I was picking up at the time. So I thought I'll just pick one. And then I'll post that to Twitter, and that's that. So I think it was just in those first few days, I found one that looked just like the crashing waves of the sky and the sea that day. So that just kind of put the idea in my head. I was like, oh, that's similar, that's nice. So I put the two together. I stopped holding the pebble, and I put it back, as I did with the collections, on a white background, and just wondered what it looked like together. So once my eyes kind of locked into that way of seeing, I just noticed how, you know, the same place from day to day, for a sea and a sky, like how rarely they're actually blue. So this was just this week at sunrise. I like to go at sunrise or sunset if possible. It's kind of the time of day that makes me wonder why we do say like the sky is blue, as if that's a given. I thought, like, if my eyes changed color constantly from 4 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then changed again from 4 p.m. to 9 p.m., like between pink and purple and yellow and orange, then like I would hesitate to be like, yeah, my eyes are blue. So I think the sunrises and the sunset, yeah, when you see those colors and when you have that variety of pebbles on the beach. I didn't see many sunrises over summer, so I'm very glad that they're back now. Not that they weren't there before, but in Scotland, they're a bit too early for me. So some of my favorite pebbles are these ones. I don't know what this is, if it's some kind of brick or something, because I think someone suggested that at some point, but like, and I've never seen brick that color, but there are certain types of sunsets, like on this day, where the sky is that kind of bluey gray, and then it's got those peachy pinks. Like, you would think that the pebble came first and then the sun came later. And then these are just a few more. So you just kind of go through, and I would always look at the horizon, like on the walk to the beach, and it would just be like, oh, it's another like blue gray day, I guess I'll just go and find a gray pebble. And then like it's not blue and it's not gray at all, it'll be green or brown or something. And then also how few pebbles are actually gray. Like, there's been a few days where it has actually been a completely gray day, and they're usually the hardest ones to find a pebble for. These are one of my favorite ones, the pudding stone, if I got that right. Although I've seen another pebble, in fact, do I have one here? Yeah. So a friend of mine said that this is also called a pudding stone where they're from. So I don't know, yeah, any information on that would be very much appreciated. But I love these. There's some of the main wall of the bank is like formed of this type of rock. So I'm assuming that a lot of these pebbles have maybe come from that at some point. And then this is one I stopped this project I started in November last year, and then I stopped it on December 31st because I thought, oh, new year, new projects, like I'll just round that off. And then at the end of January, I really missed doing the pairs. So I think this was my first one back. And yeah, just So yeah, it's just every time that I kind of thought that I wouldn't be able to find one that matches, there's always one, if you can look for long enough, which that's one thing with, especially going at sunset, you're up against the clock quite a lot of the time. So it'll be rushing to find one that almost matches, and then photographing it in the dark. But yeah, there is a pebble for every sky on that beach. This one is not from my beach. This is when I was finally able to travel and get to somewhere else. So there might be some people in the audience who can recognize this area. So this was taken on the Ross of Mull, where I was in summer last year on a beach that I think is like 90% at least, I'm not sure, granites. But even then, the granite varies in how much pink or black it contains, whether its edges are sharp or soft. Like I would find that there were certain sunrises or sunsets that a hard edged stone just didn't look right with. So here, yeah, these are all from Mull, and yeah, they're all a little bit different. This one I wasn't too happy with, but as you can see, it was getting quite dark, so I just grabbed, I think, the pinkest one that I could find. So there's a lot of artists I found just in the past year who have getting more and more interested in seeing other artists who are inspired by geology, and whether it's a case of geological time or the physical shape of earth and stone. I found a quote by from Barbara Hepworth, who wrote to Philip James, who was the director of art at the UK's Art Council, about how people acted around her sculptures, and she said, "All want to touch, and that is as it should be." So her kind of carved forms are very evocative of shapes found in nature, whether it's vast rolling hills or they could be like the shape of like the hollow of a thigh in a person. It's the way that it's made, and I think the way that she spoke about it, it's as if they would both evoke the same experiences, the same sensory experiences, but just on completely different scales. And some of the ones that I was finding, just I loved the kind of the Barbara Hepworth of them, and I cannot fathom how long it takes a pebble to be shaped to be that smooth and that fluid. And like the hadge stones there as well. These were both found on the same beach, but on 2 different days. And one of them, they are actually different colors when they're dry, but I couldn't believe the similarities in them. So she makes work that you kind of want to roll around in your hand. And on the beach, I was finding that after I was photographing them, like eventually photographing them wasn't really enough. It didn't really feel right for them all. So sometimes when you see some that are that kind of form and some that just fit in your hands completely perfectly, it was almost frustrating to see it in 2D. So when I was on the residency at Knockvolledin on Mull, on the Ross of Mull, which is where those other pebbles were photographed, I started to play around with clay pebbles of my own, just not Barbara Hepworth sized or quality by any means, but just playing with clay and kind of getting that feeling of it in your hand. So inspired a lot by these boulders on the left, which were from Ayrshire, and not just the shape, but also the color of them. So the ones on the right, that's being bisque fired or like halfway fired. So it turns this really delicate peachy pink color, which I found was the same kind of color as the limpets and the periwinkles on the beach of Knockvolledin. And then of course of the granite there as well. So this was a collection that I got on those beaches. And it kind of got me wondering, the limpets and the periwinkles there are very pink, and the ones on my beach in Ayrshire are not pink at all. So I thought, was it some form of camouflage? Was it directly linked to the granites? Like, are they eating something or hiding? Or was it just a coincidence? Like, I don't know. But then by this point, I think I'd learned that the coincidence angle was probably quite unlikely. So when I started, I was just asking all these kind of questions to myself or to other people. If I had kind of was lucky enough to be able to ask people who knew more about it than I did. But I still don't really know what I'm picking up most of the time, or care to know a lot of the time either. I can't tell the difference, much as I try, the difference between, like, maybe not, well, yeah, I'm thinking, like, if I see names like basalt and jasper in pebble form, I just have no idea what I'm looking for, or even whether that's ridiculous to think I would expect to find them on my beach or not. I'm not sure. But a lot of my practice I'm learning is about learning itself. And I'm as excited about, like, the art of the pebble as I am the science behind it, because the two are just completely interconnected. So for me, books are a way of bringing these two elements together, science and art, and making all the things that we see and the things that we think more tangible. So when I'm not picking up pebbles, I started a project called the Nature Library, which was for this exact reason. I kind of find it impossible to be interested in something without also finding interesting books about the subject. There's a quote by Erica Fretwell, who wrote Sensory Experiments, Psychophysics, Race, and the Aesthetics of Feeling. And she wrote, literature is a sensitizing mechanism, not merely a representation, but an amplification of experience, which is just exactly how I felt when I started learning more about them. So I learned a lot from this very slim book on mull granite when I was at Knott College in Studies, as well as, like, they have a really amazing range of literature and poetry in their own library, and stuff that brings objects, whether it's a stone or a chair or a rubber tire, into the center of the story and the center of the picture. And then, yeah, these connections between art and science, like, they're always there and they've always been there. And I think for me, it's just about how much we embrace them, how much one can amplify the other. One of my favorite quotes is this one by Tim Burkhead. I knew from a very early age that a sensory appreciation of the natural world was on its own not enough. But I also knew that a hard-nosed scientific approach wasn't either. I wanted to embrace both cultures, with each enriching and reinforcing the other in an endless interplay of aesthetics and information, which is exactly the kind of sentiment of Ursus Stibat in the amazing collections just underneath that. And that's from the 1700s with his collections of natural curiosities. So, you know, there's the joy in picking up pebbles, but then there's also the joy in kind of not knowing what you're picking up. There's, yeah, the pleasure of knowing, and then the pleasure of not knowing, and the pleasure of finding things out, which I don't think one can exist without the other. It's knowledge, you know, the knowing is exciting because, or I should say the not knowing is exciting because of all the knowledge that there is still to know. I kind of think of it as like when you stand at the edge of the water and you're kind of, you know that something is out there and you know that there's so much there, but you don't know what it is. And I just find that really exciting. Just, you know, there's the delight of just knowing how much more there is out there. And I think a lot of the delight in beachcombing is just the looking and the discovery of something that it didn't exist to you before. So stone holds our entire history, and often I get a little bit lost just thinking of a yeah, like how small a part of Earth we are and how old the rock is really, and not to get into the disproportionately large impact that we've made on it. But just looking at stone has taught me things that I never really thought I would learn just by going to the beach. So it's introduced me to paleontologists and archaeologists and marine biologists, and other artists and writers who really just love pebbles or anything found by the coast. So I just wanted to also mention, while I'm here, I learned about the term manuports recently. So I've been talking to Ellen Finn, and we're doing a workshop together next year, which is all on the subject of manuports, which is just, as soon as I heard that word, it kind of, by this point, I was really, really fascinated with Pebbles. So her project is called Moving, Making, Meaning, Manuports in the Archaeology of the Bronze Age Aegean, which has been funded by the Leverhulme Trust. So just these kind of things where you just think, I just went for a beach comb. But when you start looking at rocks, I suppose it's just, there's just so much there. It holds so much. So I kind of, on that subject, recently read a book called The Testimonies of the History of Jamaica by Zakiya Mackenzie. And it's a series of short historical fiction stories in response to the fact that Jamaican history has been predominantly told by white colonizers. So in it, the narrator would talk of people with names such as the Duke of Portland. So he was the governor of Jamaica in the early 1700s, a politician, a slave plantation owner, part of kind of one of the major British aristocratic families. And I started to notice names in this book where it was like, you know, Portland or Bentinck, I think that's it. I don't really know the pronunciation of that, but Titchfield. So on their own, these names wouldn't really mean much to me, but all together it was like, they're all names of the town that I live in. So then, you know, you're kind of, it's like all street names that I had passed and I knew. So I kind of started looking into that, and that's where I learned that, you know, it was the same family line of the people who built this bank. So then you're starting to ask, well, who was it that built this? How was it funded? Where did these pebbles come from? And what are the connections here? So just, you know, so much time can pass to us, and then to a stone, it's just absolutely nothing. These stories they're there to be picked up again, and stories to be told and retold. So that's just, yeah, some of the ways that I could, you know, look at pebbles without knowing anything in particular about the pebbles themselves, but it's just this, I feel like this is just a few tangents that it's taken me on, and I look forward to many, many more. But I'll stop there because I could go on more tangents, but I won't.